Today, we will be looking at what makes us, us. The essential question this video answers is, why do we end up looking the way we look? There are roughly 7 billion people in this world. That's a huge number of people, and for the most part, no two people look exactly the same, unless they're twins. So what is it that makes people look different from each other? We know that we often look like our parents and that we get traits from our parents. Remember, traits are a feature of an organism. They could be eye color, height, or even maybe a disease. This is a key part of genetics. Today you will be meeting the Abbotts. First, let me introduce you to my parents. This is my mother and my father. Nice people, very friendly. They live all the way in New Jersey. This is my older brother Dave, also a nice guy, loves roller coasters, couple of kids. And then there's me, teacher of the year, Packers fan, phenomenal flag football player. But let's take another look at the four of us. Notice anything strange? My mother and father both have dark hair. My brother has dark hair. I have red hair. So how does that work? No, I'm not adopted. Yes, those are my parents. We know that we received our traits from our parents, so how come I received a trait from my parents that neither of them seem to have? Well, this all has to do with what we call dominant and recessive traits. We looked at this a little bit. Remember, dominant traits are those that beat out recessive traits. We can have both traits as part of our genotype, but only one will show up in our phenotype, or what we look like. Okay, so we know what dominant and we know what recessive mean, but we need a way to represent that. That method is called Punnett squares. So way back in the day, early 1900s, this guy named Reginald Crundall Punnett, what a great name, devised a way to represent the probability that an offspring would end up with a given trait. We call it Punnett squares, and this is why. This is what they look like. Here's how they work. Each of our parents carries two possible alleles for a given trait. These two alleles is called their genotype. These alleles are represented by a letter. The letter is uppercase if it's a dominant allele, and lowercase if it is recessive. We put the two alleles the father provides on one side of the Punnett square, and the two alleles the mother provides on the others. Then we combine the alleles to figure out the potential combinations that their offspring could have. If a parent's alleles are the same, we call that homozygous. If they are different, we call that heterozygous. If it is homozygous dominant, that means that both letters will be uppercase and the parent only has dominant alleles. If it is homozygous recessive, then both letters will be lowercase and the parent will only have recessive alleles. If it is heterozygous, then there will be one uppercase and one lowercase letter. In that case, the parent carries both the dominant and the recessive allele. So this might sound confusing. Let's use a real-world example. Say we have a father and he is homozygous dominant for brown eyes, which we will represent with the capital letter B. We'll put two capital B's along the top row of the Punnett square. Remember, homozygous dominant. He has the dominant alleles for brown eyes, going to be two capital B's. Now, let's say that the mother is heterozygous, which means she has brown eyes, but has one capital letter B and one lowercase letter b. She carries the recessive trait, even though she shows brown eyes. We'll put these letters along the other row of the Punnett square. Now we combine them. This will determine the possibilities for the offspring of this mother and father. So these parents could have kids with the following genotypes: 50% homozygous dominant, capital B, and 50% heterozygous, capital B, lowercase b. Because we know that dominant traits always beat out recessive traits, all of the children will have what color eyes? If you said brown eyes, you are correct. So that brings us back to our original question. How is it I ended up with red hair when both my parents have dark hair? How come I did not have dark hair like my parents and my brother? Well, let's look at the possible Punnett squares. First of all, red hair is a recessive trait, so let's look at the possibilities for what combinations could result in red hair. Let's say a capital D is the allele for the dominant trait of dark hair, and a lowercase d is the allele for the recessive trait of red hair. So Punnett square number 1. If both my parents are homozygous dominant, this is what the Punnett square would look like. If one of my parents is homozygous dominant and the other is heterozygous, this is what the Punnett square would look like. If one of my parents is homozygous dominant and the other is homozygous recessive, then this is what the Punnett square would look like. If both of my parents were homozygous recessive, then this is what the Punnett square would look like. If one parent was homozygous recessive and the other was heterozygous, then this is what the Punnett square would look like. And finally, if both my parents are heterozygous, then this is what the Punnett square would look like. What must my parents' genotypes be? In other words, which Punnett square is the only possible explanation for me having red hair? Let's take a look at them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. If you said Punnett square number 6, the one where both parents are heterozygous, you are correct. Let me explain why. First, let's take a look at Punnett square number 1. If both parents are homozygous dominant, then all the resulting offspring would have dark hair, like my brother. That would be a possibility if I had dark hair like my brother, but since I do not, then this one is not possible. The same thing goes for Punnett square number 2. The combinations can only result in offspring with dark hair because every box in every genotype has a dominant allele. So once again, this one does not work. So let's skip ahead and take a look at Punnett square number 6. If we take a look at this, both parents are heterozygous. There are 3 squares that result in dark hair due to the dominant allele, and 1 square that results in recessive allele, which is red hair. That means that there was a 75% chance that one offspring would have dark hair like my brother did, and a 25% chance that one offspring would have red hair like I do. So while it was not a good chance that I would end up with red hair, this one does work. So there was a 25% chance that I would end up with red hair, and I did. But wait a second, Mr. Abbott, what about Punnett squares 3 through 5? Why won't those work? I mean, if I take a look at Punnett square number 5, that one has a 50% chance of having a kid with red hair and a 50% chance of having a kid with brown hair, right? So I look at the dominants and the recessive alleles, and that works. If you said that, you're correct. However, remember that neither of my parents have red hair. Punnett squares 3 through 5 have at least one parent with red hair. Since both of my parents have dark hair, that does not work. So there are 2 key things that I want you to be able to do after watching this video. First of all, I want you to be able to create Punnett squares based on the information you've been given. If you need a review of that, please replay the video showing how we made them. Secondly, I want you to be able to answer this question. What is the only way that a recessive trait can be passed down from parents to their children? If you said that both parents have to at least carry the recessive trait, then you are correct. This video explains how I was able to have red hair even though neither of my parents did. For a recessive trait to be passed down, both parents must carry that trait in their genotype. So, both my parents were heterozygous. They had a dominant allele for dark hair, explaining why they had dark hair, and a recessive allele for red hair, so they carried it even though they didn't show it. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.